Sorry about that. We actually never continued because we waited to try and get the phone back on, the system back up. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'm sorry about it. I'm sorry. Tony, is it okay now? Okay. The Gemara in Sukkah, the first sugya in the Gemara in Sukkah discusses what is the machlokes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda as to a Sukkah which is more than 20 amas high. Why is it? What's the machlokes? What's the basis of the machlokes? There are different reasons for the machlokes, and one of the reasons the Gemara says that is that the pasuk says that you should know so you should know that you're sitting in the sukkah, and the Chachamim say higher than 20 amas, you can't know you're sitting in the sukkah because it's so high. Rabbi Yehuda says that you can't hear me, Tolly. Tolly, can you hear me now? No, they can't hear me. Andrew, can you hear me? Okay, it will be recorded. Okay, so if you say the machlokes in the sukkahs is to do with the man yedu doreseichem, it's too bad. If we say the machlokes in sukkahs man yedu doreseichem of the 20 amas, so then it comes out that the machlokes in sukkah is exactly the same machlokes as the Gemara over here. And if that's the case, why do you have to have two mishnahs arguing about the same thing? That is the next Gemara. It says the workers, by Yitzchak, it doesn't hold the rabba. And he's really hold the rabba, but if he holds the rabba, Omar Rabba, if you say the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Chacham is whether a person knows whether you're sitting in the sukkah or not, Mishum more than 20 times person doesn't see. So they're arguing exactly the same argument in sukkahs. If you go with Tati Lomoni, so why do you need to have two arguments? That means the machlokes in Mavui is where the 20 amas the person sees. The machlokes in sukkah is where the person sees 20 amas. Why would you have to have two arguments? So Moses says, no, it's tzricha, you need it. You need the argument both by sukkah and by Mavui. And Moses says very straightforward. Why? You're sitting in the sukkah. You're eating all your meals. You're sleeping there all the time. You're talking, you're learning there. So of course you're going to eventually notice the schach. It might be 20 amas high, but the fact is, you're sitting there constantly. Since you're sitting there constantly, that's why you notice even if it's 20 amas high. But when you're walking up and down the street to leave the mavui, to come into the mavui, maybe it's waited to Chachamim that less than 20, that more than 20 amas a person won't notice. If we only say about mavui, then the Rabbanon are machmir. When it comes to sukkah, when we're doing Rabbi Yehuda, maybe Gemara says could very well be that both by Movi and by sukkah they're arguing about the same question. Can a person see above? Does a person notice more than 20 amas? Oh, why do you have to have the same argument twice? The answer is it's not true. It's not the same argument. Sukkah, a person sits there for a long time. Since a person sits there for a long time, he'll notice. Movi, a person doesn't. So if you need to have both arguments, because if you don't have one, you would say that's where they hold, but not about the other. And therefore, it's not a superfluous. It's not unnecessary. We need to have both machlokes, both by sukkah and by mavui, as to whether something had in 20 amas is gosh or not. Now the world goes for a little bit detail. So, maya malto. What is a malto? Kini, Rashi explains, is an engraving of birds in the wood. That in the Beis Hamikdash, in the entrance to the Beis Hamikdash, they engraved pictures of doves into the wood. The Rabbi Chanan explains they actually had birds' nests there. Wooden beams. If a person notices beams, of course he'll notice birds' nests. But when it comes to beams, a person doesn't notice. What's so special if it's beams? Why would a person notice it? The answer is because it stretches. Because you've got big beams. That it stretches, becoming a bottom deloy. And the Chachamim say that nevertheless, if it's more than 20 amas, it's no good. And since it's important, it's a valuable piece of wood, so people hear about it and people notice it. So we have two explanations what the Malta was. And here they actually show pictures of it, nice pictures. It shows exactly what the Malta looked like. But it's very hard to see on this screen. So here you've got one amalta of the 5 beams of wood across the roof. Here, if you look inside the wood, there's engravings of birds. If you look very, very carefully, can you see? You can't see from there. It's very, very, it means in the wood they engraved pictures of birds, and that was the Amalta. So again, so the Amalta was on top of the Beis Hamikdash, and if a person uses the Amalta on top of a Mavoi, even if it's 120 Amos, it's okay. Now the Gemara goes into more halachas of the keva, the beam. As we mentioned, the purpose of the beam is what? Is that people should notice that it's an enclosure, that's a closed off area. So it has to be a significant beam. So the Gemara says like this. Mixas keva b'seich esim, or mixas keva l'mala me'esim. What happens if part of the beam is lower than 20 amos and part of the beam is higher than 20 amos? Or by sukkah, mixas chach b'seich esim, or mixas chach l'mala me'esim. The Gemara asks both questions, even though in theory the halachas could be different, as we will see. But since we discussed both the Mishnah and Sukkah, Mishnah and Eiruvin, we asked them the two together. And the question is, if you've got a Sukkah, which is the schach is partly above 20 and partly below 20, or a beam which is partly above 20 and partly below 20, what is the tip? Says the Gemara, Omar Rabba, b'mavoi kasha. When it comes to a mavoi, it is kasha. But Sukkah, possible, when it comes to a Sukkah, it is possible. Says the Gemara, Ma'ishna b'mavoi de kasha dominon kalush. Sukkah naminema kalush. Let me take this. What is the problem? If you've got a beam more than 20 amos, or schach more than 20 amos, and also below 20 amos, what is the obvious solution? How do you want to make it kosher? What you have to do is, you have to imagine as if it's thinned out. If you've got a beam, let's say it's a meter thick, and half the meter is below the 20 amos, and half the meter is above the 20 amos. So what would you say? I need to have it below 20 amos. It's not a problem. Chop it up. Chop off the half. Pretend that it's not there. And you've got to be within 20 amos. So what's the problem? The same thing with the schach. You've got very, very thick schach. Lots and lots of, what's that stuff called? Woodwork. So it's very, very thick. So some of it is above 20 amos, some of it's below 20 amos. So cut off the top, pretend it's not there, and it's okay. Says, well, no, you can't say that. Why? If you start cutting it off, then if half the schach is cut off, then what's going to happen is the amount of schach remaining will be so limited that you will have more sun than shade. And we know that you have to have a majority of schach. So if you say that everything above 20 amos is if it's not there, you've hardly got this schach left. Says the Gemara, if you're going to cut the beam in half, it's a beam that gets swept away by the wind. And one of the halachas is that the beam has to be strong enough that it doesn't get swept away by the wind. So let's say a meter was a bad example, because a meter, half a meter will still not be swept away by the wind. Let's say the wood is only 2 centimeters thick. And a 2 centimeter piece of wood, that won't get swept away by the wind. But the problem is, one of the centimeters is within 20 amos, one of the centimeters is above 20 amos. You cut it down the middle, you've only got now a 1 centimeter piece of wood. You cut it down, the wind will blow it away. So therefore, you need the part which is above 20 amos. And the part which is above 20 amos is no good because it's too high. So that's why it's no good. Says the Gemara, what do you have to say? We imagine as if the wood is made out of metal. And therefore, when it's made out of metal, nothing can blow it away. It's like a metal stick, a metal spear, which can't be blown away. Since it's a metal spear that can't be blown away, so therefore, let's say again, we've got a 2 meter piece of wood. 2 centimeter piece of wood. 1 centimeter is below 20 amos, 1 centimeter is above 20 amos. Or if we cut it down the middle, it'll look like as if it's not, it's no good. And says, no, we don't look at it like that. What we do is we say to ourselves, it's as if that bottom centimeter is made out of metal. It won't get burned away, and therefore it's okay. Says the Gemara, if that's the case, let's say the same thing. Let's say that the wood, the schach, which is below the 20 amos, is good enough. Who says that we have to say that the schach below the 20 amos is more sun? Let's say we cut it down the middle, take away the schach above, and still have more shade. Like this. The chiluk between sukkah and the difference between sukkah and mavoi is as follows. Sukkah de loyochid lo mitka. What will happen is like this. You've got schach, which partly is more than 20 amos, partly less than 20 amos. Now you've got to imagine the belt which is more than 20 times if it's not there. And then what happens is the bit that's there, we'll say that that's enough. But over sukkah, sometimes the wood can fall in, and some of the schach falls away, and you might not notice. And by the time you don't notice, you'll be relying on the schach, which is more than 20 amasa, which is no good. And since it's only one person living there, he won't notice. That means something which the public are using, it's much more likely that somebody will notice. And therefore, by Mavui, we permit it, but by Sukkah, we forbid it. Sukkah is made for the individual person, and the person might not notice. But by Mavui, a person will definitely notice. And that is the reason. Sukkah, which is Minatira, Chachamim Machmir. So we have two explanations why we're more machmir by sukkah than we are by eruv. Either because by sukkah it's individual and individual people will notice, or by sukkah it's deraisa, and that's why people will have to be more machmir. Now the Gemara's got very similar kind of Gemara, but just the other way around. It's a similar kind of style with the logic the other way. He learned the whole sukkah the other way around. But Mavui possible sukkah kasher. Instead of saying that by Mavui it is good and by sukkah it's no good, he says the other way around. That by sukkah it's okay, but by Mavui it's not. Says, well, why not? Ma'ishlo sukkah de kasher dominon kolush. We say as if it's cut down, as if it's thinned out. But Mavui nami lema kolush. Let's say it's been thinned out. Kolshus. If you thin it out, tablo kaditeres b'ruach. So then people will be blown away by the wind. Ochadami kolshus avle chavos b'bud silso. If you thin out the schach, there'll be more sun than shade. You have to say it's as if the shade is more. You're going to have to say the metal, and therefore it won't get blown away. That means the Gemara says, I don't understand your logic. That means why would you make a difference between Mavui and Sukkah? If by Mavui it is okay, so if by Mavui it's no good, so why by Sukkah is it okay? The other way around, interesting logic. Sukkah what happens is like this. A sukkah belongs to one person. A person feels responsible. He'll make sure that the beam will be okay. But the mavoi belongs to everybody. So let's say we live all on the road, and we know that we have to have a mavoi, and we have to have a koira. And what happens is, we know this 120 times. What will we do? Well, each person will say somebody will take care of it. And meanwhile, nobody will take care of it. So therefore, we say that it's no good. Says the word, there's a statement, there's a saying, a pot which belongs to two people, never gets hot and never gets cold. Too many cooks spoil the broth. Meaning that when you have too many people responsible, nobody is responsible. So therefore, by Movu, we are more machmir. Sukkah which is Chazal didn't have to be machmir because since it's minatira, people are already more cautious. There had to be more machmir. So let's summarize it like this. We're talking about schach, which partly is higher than 20 times, partly lower, or a beam which is partly higher, partly lower. We've had now two different statements. One statement was that by sukkah it's okay, by mavui it's not. And we had another statement by Mavui it's okay, and by Sukkah it's not, the other way around. And we had two explanations to each version. The first version, that by Sukkah it's no good, we had two explanations. Either because Sukkah is Deiraisa and Mavui is D'Rabbanan, so you have to be more machmir by Deiraisa. Alternatively, because Sukkah belongs to individual won't get round to doing it. And then we had the other way around, that perhaps by Mavui we're more machmir. Either by Mavui, since it belongs to the public, nobody will take responsibility and will end up having no beam within the 20 amos at all. Or alternatively, since it's a D'Rabbanan de Kalocha, sometimes Chazal were more machmir by D'Rabbanan than by Deraisas, because they knew that by Deraisas people are cautious and scared. But they wanted to make sure that by D'Rabbanan as well they should be machmir. So because of these two reasons, we have two versions. And that is two other statements regarding this question. It's always possible. It's always kosher. And that's is how we pass that it is always kosher. So if you've got a very high sukkah and you pile on the schach, and some of the schach is higher than 20 amos, it's okay. As long as some of the schach is below. Why? Says the Gemara, top of Gimel base, halal sukkah and halal mavui. The main thing is there shouldn't be a hollow space of more than 20 amos. And if part of the schach goes into the 20 amos, a part of the beam goes into 20 amos, it is okay. And therefore, it doesn't matter if there's 20 amos, as long as there's no 20 amos space. I'll prove it to you. Why? Because it says if it's higher than the heichal, put it down. Mashma, if it's exactly like the heichal, it's okay. Now, what was the heichal? 20 amos high. So if you think about it, the actual height was exactly 20 amos. It doesn't say that if it's higher than that, it's no good. If it's mashma, that even if it's a tiny bit lower than that, it's okay. Because it just says that if it's higher than the space of the eichel, you've got to do it 20 amos. Do it more than 20 amos, it's no good. But if even a little bit goes in with the 20 amos, it is okay. So we see like Rova, that as long as it isn't a 20 amos gap, it is okay. We bring another price which seems to contradict Rova. What should the person do? That you have to put it lower than 20 amos. You have to translate it not below 20 amos, but above 20 amos, meaning starting at the exact point of 20 amos and upwards. How can you say that for the matter ketani? We're going to have another rule later, that the beam of the marble we said till now mustn't be higher than 20 amos. It also mustn't be lower than 10 tefachim. 10 tefachim is about 1.5 meters. If a beam is lower than 1.5 meters, then what happens is it doesn't look like an ancient sway. It looks like a piece of wood stuck on the floor. So it mustn't be lower than 10 tefachim. When the Braisa says it has to be lower than 20 amos, it doesn't mean lower than 20 amos, because we pass like Rava, that as long as there's no more than 20 amos. Rather, it means like this, that both when it comes to the 20 amos height and the 10 tefachim, maximum of 20 amos and the minimum of 10 tefachim, you have to make sure that there is at least exactly 10 tefachim or 20 amos. You don't need to be more than 20 amos. And if you've got a beam which is above 20 amos, but one tiny part of it goes within the 20 amos, then that's okay. And the same thing when you've got a beam for 10 tefachim, you have to have 10 tefachim gap, and then you have the beam. So when it says ulamata, it doesn't mean lower than 20 amos. It just means just like above, you have to have 20 amos, below, you have to have 10 tefachim. Now the next Gemara is a cheshbon Gemara. The Gemara understood that there were different kinds of amos, some big, some small. The first version is the version of Abaye. Abaye's version is as follows, that some amos are made out of 6 tefachim, and some amos are made out of 5 tefachim. As a rough guideline, according to the Chazon Ish, a tefach is about 10 centimeters. According to Abaye, some amos were 60 centimeters, and some amos were 50 centimeters, which makes it very, very confusing. Because if I say to you 4 amos, your next question should be, but which amos? Do I mean the amos of 6 tefachim? Do I mean amos of 5 tefachim? Comes along Abaye and says that we don't know. We don't know. Whenever the Mishnah says the word amo, we have no idea what the Mishnah means. Doesn't mean a 6 tefachim amo, doesn't mean a 5 tefachim amo. Since we don't know, what do? We go to Chubba. The reason we're so machmir nowadays is because we don't know. The more we would know, the less machmir we would have to be. So the point is, since we don't know, we always have to go to Chumma. And Abaye sets it up as a general rule. When is it a Chumma? When is it a Kula? Says Abaye like this. Amas Sukkah, whenever it comes to Sukkah, the Amas Movoi, and whenever we talk about an Amo Movoi, the Amo Bas Chamisha, we talk about an Amo 5 Tvachim Luchum. But Amas Kilayim, when we talk about Kilayim, which we'll explain in greater length, the Amas Bas Shisha, we're talking about 6 Tvachim. And then we'll explain, elaborate. Amas Movoi, the Amo Bas Chamisha. Lemay Hilchasa. What halacha? The Govoi. The first thing is the height. We said in our Mishnah, how high is the highest you could put the beam? 20 amos. Now, if an amos is 6 tefachim, that's 120 tefachim. If it's 5 tefachim, it's only 100 tefachim. Now, we don't know if an amos is 6 tefachim or 5 tefachim, says Abaye. So we have to be lechumma. What is lechumma over here? Less, 5 tefachim amo. So therefore, it has to be 20 amos of the 5 tefachim amo. So that is one chumma. Next chumma, ulapiltzas movoi. We said that an ovoi that has a broken down fence of 10 amos, you're not allowed to carry in the movoi. Now, 10 amos break in the fence. What would be a chumrah? A smaller amma or a bigger amma? What would be a chumrah? Smaller amma. Because if you say 6 tefachim, you've got much bigger space before it becomes a problem. But if you say the small amma, so as long, even if you got 10 ammas of the small amma, that's the whole break in the fence, you have to be machbet. Says Abaya for pilzas movui, you have to be machbet. Pay the movui, it can moshech movui be'aba ammas. This is a more complicated thing. I should more explain more at the point later. I just explained briefly now. The halacha is that the beam has to be 20 ammas and no more. Let's say a person put the beam higher than 20 ammas. He's got a solution. What is the solution? He can build a step underneath the beam. If you build a step there, so when people go into the mobile, they have to stand on the step. Once they're on the step, then the beam is no longer 20 ammas higher than their heads. How big does the step have to be? So that is a machlokes. The Gemara brings one opinion, it has to be 4 ammas deep. That means it has to be a proper distance. That the first 4 ammas that you come into the mobile, there should be a big step. And then those 4 ammas, when you're standing, the beam is no longer 20 ammas higher because you've got a big step, then it's okay. Now there, where would be a chumrah? To make a big amma or small amma? Big amma. The chumrah would be a big amma. Because if you say that you have to have a minimum of 4 ammas in order for the mobile to be kosher when it's got a beam 20 ammas high, so it has to be a minimum, you have to, when you say 4 ammas, you're being machmit to say big ammas. How can I buy a step whenever we talk about mobile, we talk about the small ammas, the chumrah? There's actually a chumrah in saying a big amma when we're talking about the step into the mobile. What? Not if it's got no walls, its own separate walls. Says the Gemara, inside the there's another opinion that the step only has to be 4 tefachim. Why? The depth, the platform. Because the beam is more than 20 ammas. Now, if you make a tiny step, you just stand over it and they don't notice the beam. If you make a platform, so people stand on the platform and then see the beam, which is will be less than 20 ammas from the platform. The Gemara, if that's the case, it's 4 ammas l'chum. Answers the Gemara, K'mandoma baba tefachim. He holds like the mandoma that you only need to have 4 tefachim platform, and they never said that halacha of 4 ammas there, so therefore you don't need it. People say baba ammas, v'void ammas come out. When Abaya said the ammas by mavoi is lechumra, and therefore you have to say the smaller ones, it didn't mean every single time we mentioned amma we always go lechumra by small. Sometimes we go chumra big, but most times when we say amma, for example, the height of a mov, where you said that the beam mustn't be more than 20 ammas high, it has to be the smaller amma, because if it's the bigger amma, then you've got much bigger height. Carries on. Amma sukkah. By amma sukkah as well, you have to be lechumra. By amma bas chamishon. A sukkah must be more than 20 ammas high. When would be a bigger machumra? To make a small amma or bigger amma? That's a small amma. Because if it be higher than 20 ammas of the smaller amma, it's already possible. So saying a small amma makes it a chumras for the height of the sukkah. Carries on the Gemara. Very briefly, is that if you want the schach should really touch onto the wall. Let's say you've got a bit of posel wall around. Some people have a built-in sukkah. You have built-in sukkah usually around the schach. You've got posel schach. So then we've got a principle of doifin hakuma. It's as if the wall bends inwards. Doifin hakuma only works to a maximum of 4 ammas, no more. If you've got 5 ammas gap, then you can't use doifin hakuma. It's as if the wall is not attached to the schach. Now, what would be a bigger chumrah? Big ammas or small ammas? Small ammas. Because then you're saying that you're only allowed up to 20 tefachim. So you'd only be allowed up to 2 meters according to Chaznish. If you say the big ammas, you'd be allowed 2.4 meters. So saying a small amma for doifin hakuma is a chumrah. The halacha is a sukkah which is too small is not kosher. There is a man that how big does a sukkah have to be minimum size? It's 4 ammas. Now, if you say they're small, so then it's a kula because you're saying a very small sukkah of 4 ammas small. It has to be at least 4 ammas by 4 ammas. And if you say it's the small ones, it comes out of kula. And also the same 2 terutzim as before. Either he holds like the chachamim that you don't need 4 ammas, you only need a sukkah like we paskan, which can hold the person, his majority of his body in this table, which is 7 tefachim, and therefore we never mentioned ammas there altogether. He meant the majority of ammas by sukkah. The smaller they are, the more machmir you have to be. Again, Abaye says there's some amos which are 5 tvachim, some which are 6. You always have to be machmir. Says Abaye, when it comes to Movi and Sukkah, you always have to be machmir to say small. Says the Gemara, is that true? It's always a chumrah small. We managed to find 1 or 2 unique examples where actually being a chumrah is big. So there's always 2 different ways of answering. Either he meant the majority of cases, the chumrah is small. The minority of cases, the chumrah is bigger. Or he was going according to the shitta, where in those cases you don't need to come on to Amma, we're talking about Tvachim. Now we're going to Kilayim. By Kilayim, Abaye told us that we go to the other extreme. And we say that we have to always be machmir to a big Amma. A big Amma of how many Tvachim? 6 Tvachim. One is that. So the halacha is you're not allowed to plant wheat or barley in a vineyard. For something to be considered a vineyard, it's not enough to have just one grapevine. You have to have lots and lots of vines growing together. Imagine a person has a beautiful vine, and suddenly in the middle of the vine, a disease crops up, and in the middle of the vine, loads of different... You got cut off for 1 minute, literally. Again, person has a vine. Part of the vine died out in the middle. He's not allowed to plant wheat in the vine, but since part of it died out in the middle, he wants to plant wheat. If there's enough space in the middle of the vine that it's considered its own entity, is allowed to plant wheat. Alternatively, he's got a beautiful vine. Around the vine, lots of the grapes started to die. So what does he want to do? He wants to plant wheat around it. Again, if enough, the halacha is that the wall around the vine is considered part of the vine. If there's enough space that he can make it his own entity, then it is okay. I'll just show you very briefly pictures because it makes it a lot easier. And here they've got very nice pictures to describe the vine. Yeah, can you first show it here? Can you see? Here is a vine where in the middle, the white is this shows you area where there's no grapes growing. So he wants to grow in the yellow. Here's the wall of the vine and he wants to grow. Here I just show very briefly, you've got walls around the vine and a gap between the vine and the wall, or in the middle of the vine. Learn as follows. They Shammai say that you have to have 24 amos inside the vine, completely empty, before you're allowed to plant any wheat. And around the vine, and around the vine they say 16, he says 12. So I have an argument between Shammai and Hillel how much desolate vine you have to have before you can start planting. And the Brishta explains, the middle of it became destroyed. If there's no 16 amos, they'll be selling sham. If it's got 16 amos, the svor is like this. They still hold that a field has to be 4 amos. Since you're planting in the middle, it has to have double 4 amos because it's as if half of it is applying to one side of the field and half of it is the other. So you have to have 8 amos. Now, if you've got, besides for the 8 amos, a 4 amos perimeter ring, so that's good enough because you've got a proper space between the vineyard and the thing. So 4 amos on each side because you can't have 4. So you've got 8 amos plus 4 amos on each side. Altogether, that comes to 16 amos. So if you've got 16 amos gap in the middle, then you're allowed to plant. With Shammai say for a field to be considered significant, it has to be 8. Times it by 2 because it's as if it's in a field, as if 2 sides of the field is 16. Plus they also say you need to have 4 by 4. As long as there's also 8 by 8 in the middle. You have to have 2 things. Now, these amos, what would be a chumrah? Small amos or big amos?
Big amos.
Big amos. So if over here says Abai, you have to have big amos. Because over here we're machmir, you have to have big amos. What's the circle around the vineyard? If there's no 12 amos, you do 4 amos, there's a ve'asasha that you can plant it. Oh, because around the wall you have to keep a space because people used to work around the vineyard, and then you also have to have space to actually be able to plant. So therefore, what happens is you have to have, according to the Hillel, 12 amos. If you look over here, you've got 4 amos from the vineyard to the patch of grain, and then 4 amos from the patch of grain to the wall. The wall is the area which people used to work around the vineyard as well. If you don't have all that, it's considered no good. According to Bishama, you have to actually have 8 amas of grain, because less than 8 amas is considered part of the vineyard, and therefore it's also. Says the Gemara, how can you say that? There's sometimes, for Iker with Sufim, again, the halacha is that if a vineyard is being planted incorrectly, it's not considered a vineyard. It's considered an individual vine, and then you're allowed to plant next to it. A very strange halacha. Now, what's considered planted incorrectly is if you plant the vines so cramped together that nobody will ever let them stay like that, then you're actually allowed to plant wheat there. What's the normal spacing between one line of vines and another? It's 4 amas. So if you plant them only 3 amas apart, then it's not considered a vineyard, and you're allowed to plant wheat there. Wherever you want. Even in between the grapes. Even though they're not actually tighter, closer, you're allowed to, because it's not vine, because eventually you're going to uproot it. Now there, the smaller it is, the bigger chumrah it is. Because what you're saying is that there has to be a 4 amas gap in order for it to be considered a vineyard. So if you've got only, let's say, 4 amas or the 5 tvachim, it's already considered a proper vineyard. So the smaller it is, the bigger chumrah it is. They say it is a kerem. The Chachamim say no, it is a vine. We just pretend the middle lines are not there. And it's not that they say it is a vineyard. He meant the majority of amas, not all amas. So let's go like this. Let's explain very briefly. Abaya told us that there are 2 kinds of amas. We'll stop over here. Abaya said there are 2 kinds of amas. Some amas of 5 tvachim, some amas of 6 tvachim. We don't know when the Mishnah says an amma, which amma we're referring to. We always go l'chumma. We always go l'chumma. Whenever it's a chumma, one way we go that way, whenever it's chumma that way, we go the other way. Abai said, generally speaking, by sukkah and mavui, it's a chumma to have a smaller amma. By kilayim, it's a chumma to say a bigger amma. The Gemara manages to find exceptions to the rules. The Gemara says it means the majority of cases are going to command omim that it isn't. And therefore, when it comes like this, according to Abai, when we say that a beam mustn't be more than 20 amas, how many tefachim high are you allowed to do it? According to Abai, you're only allowed only 100. We don't pass like Abai. Because according to Abai, you would only be allowed to do a mavui up to the beam of 20 amas of 5 tvachim, not 6 tvachim. We know that no amas is 6 tvachim. He said, no, you have to make over 5 tvachim. But the mice, according to Abai, you would only be allowed to do a beam of up to 20 amas or 5 tvachim because it's machmer. Okay, very good. We'll stop here. I'm very sorry about that. We're going to find another system. Tolly or Levi, Andrew, anybody? David, anybody can hear me? Yehuda? No. Okay, maybe somebody can bring tomorrow a chargeable phone, a phone charge, which we can.
Could I speak to Basin and see if we could join their Wi-Fi?
Okay, you try, Levi. The more people that try. How was it, Tolly, tonight? Tolly, how's it going?
It wasn't great. Next week I'll bring my iPad so you can go directly off there, but we need somebody to bring an iPad this week or something.
An iPad is different from a smartphone?
It's not bad, but it stutters the whole time and the video goes off and things.
Why can't a smartphone do what the iPad can do?
It's not great. You can ask the Basin if their Wi-Fi.
Does anybody have an iPad?
No, because the iPad uses my data, which is better than the dongle.
Oh.
The iPad uses my data.
Right.
So it'll be good reception.
Right. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Very good. Okay, any question? If you got any questions, you can always text me or call me or leave me a message. That's with everything. Okay, look forward to seeing you.
We never use within the same get.